those listeners and viewers. I'm here today with Dr. Lewis Mehl-Madrona. Dr. Lewis Mehl-Madrona has been a student of indigenous Native American healing practices for over 50 years, and he's the author of quite a number of books. I'll mention two of them. Coyote Medicine is one, and Coyote Healing is the other. He's been on a number of podcasts with me before. We've had some really fascinating conversations, and we're going to pick that up again today with a new topic. So welcome, Lewis. I'm so glad to have you back on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So today, I thought we would look at the connection between narrative medicine and bodywork. And those are two topics that I know have been passions for you and certainly for me as well, although from a slightly different perspective. So let's start with narrative medicine. What does narrative medicine mean to you?
Well, I think I first encountered narrative medicine with my grandmother, who talked story constantly. And it was her way of manipulating us to do things like wash the dishes, take out the trash, whatever needed to happen. And sometimes he would just say, okay, I'll do it, just to avoid a story. But, so when I started looking for elders to, with whom to study, which was when I was at Stanford in 1972, which is when that began, they talked story constantly. And they also put their hands on your body and did work. Whatever we call it, energy medicine, indigenous bodywork, indigenous osteopathy. So they didn't understand that there was a split between talk therapy and touch therapy. And as far as I have seen in the indigenous world, that split does not exist. So every time I've had hands-on work, I've also been, engaged in dialogue, storytelling, or just conversation about my life, which is a story as it is. And that's been true in New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, North Carolina, Oklahoma, California. Sadly, I haven't encountered any bodywork in South Dakota, which is something that really puzzles me, but that's another podcast. That's another topic.
So, yeah, and I'll certainly chime in on the connection with curanderismo, or indigenous Mesoamerican healing, where we also have narrative medicine and an element of body work as well. And when I use the term narrative medicine, and you can tell me whether you agree with this or not, I'm using the word in two senses of the word. The medicine and narrative is coming, well, actually, I should say three, because the patient or the client, depending on which term you want to use, is describing their own narrative of their life process. There is the narrative that you, the healer, is expressing. And in each case, we're trying to talk about how to create a more positive outcome, because what often seems to happen is people get into a loop and the same old story is told over and over again. So one of the things that we want to introduce is that there is another possibility. And then that third branch of narrative medicine is when we introduce usually a traditional story, or it might be just a simple anecdote, which suggests on a deep level that something else is possible, and that is the medicine. So those are the three ways that I would use the term narrative medicine. Does that sound right to you?
It does indeed. It reminds me of the famous hypnotherapist Milton Erickson, who said that his work was about getting people out of the trance that they were already in, instead of
Yeah, he
putting
wasn't
them.
worried about getting somebody into a trance. It was getting them out of the trance that they've been so accustomed to.
Right, 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 right. And I think that all of the indigenous healers with whom I, studied bodywork were all about that. They knew people. I mean, they knew their clients so well, and because they talked story with them and had conversations, and so they intuitively knew that changing the story about you shift the energy in the body was so much more powerful than just either one alone. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so that's what they did.
Can you tell us anything about the particular healers that you worked with?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my favorite bunch were three Cherokee people that lived in Tucson when I was there, and um, their their thing was, they if the curtains were open, clinic was on, and if the curtains were closed, clinic was off. And so um, you would come in if the curtains were open and sit down in the kitchen with them, and everyone would be chain smoking except for me, and drinking coffee, copious coffee, which I have some limits about also. So I was a little weird already to them, but they tolerated me. Um, and and the storying would already be started. People would be telling the stories of their lives and what was going on. And at some point, they would be inspired to pick the person up and take them to the treatment room and have at them. It could be one of them, two of them, or three of them. And when I was there, I got to be included. But the talking was constant, and it was all about revisioning your life, revisioning your choices, seeing things from a broader perspective. Radical acceptance, compassion, letting go of hatred. Because, they knew their clients so well, they knew exactly what they needed to do to feel better. This is like in the UK, we were talking about this sort of thing, which is common there in ethnic communities. And people called it the National Stealth Service, because it happens in the shadows of the National Health Service, and it's probably a lot more effective than what happens in broad daylight under fluorescent lights of the NHS.
So we're going to get into more specifics about what the work is, but I wanted to talk for a moment about the difference in indigenous ways of learning compared to our, let's say, American academic model, or even a workshop model of how you learn something. So in your case, did these three people talk to you and teach you step by step on what to do, or did you just kind of stand in the background and watch and see what they did and try to model it on your own at some point?
It's very much like the saying we have in medical schools, which is see one, do one, teach one. So there was no didactics.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it is in indigenous communities. You figure out how to blend, how to be unobtrusive and enter into the flow without annoying anyone. That's the whole shtick, I think.
I do know that, and because this is a podcast, I'm asking you the question.
Yeah. Well, that's really what it was all about. It was just, you know, being humble, being helpful, and participating.
And Lewis, we're it looks like we're going to go into two separate segments on this, and we'll pursue much more the specifics of what happens. But I wanted to mention something that you do in your work, which is using this term two-eyed seeing. And maybe you could describe that a little bit as a lead-in to the deeper work that we're discussing today.
Sure. Well, two-eyed seeing, which was a term created by Albert Marshall, who's a Mi'kmaq from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. And he was trying to say that the indigenous worldview, perspective, knowledge, is equally valid to the scientific, modern, contemporary worldview and knowledge. And the word in his language in Mi'kmaq is Edawaptamunk. And so I think it's a really wonderful concept to say that indigenous knowledge is equally valid to any other knowledge that's being promoted. And as you know, biomedicine thinks that its knowledge is the only knowledge and superior to all other knowledges. But as Hamlet said, there are things in earth and sky that are beyond your philosophy, Horatio. And it's true. I've seen amazing, miraculous healing in Indian country that cannot be explained in the contemporary biomedical model. And that doesn't mean that it didn't happen.
Well, let me just mention why you are the ideal person to talk about this, because you, in your day job, you are a psychiatrist in a hospital.
Right, that's true. I'm a conventional guy by day and a weirdo by night.
Yeah, which is really great. So when you say two-eyed seeing, are you saying simply that the two are equally valid, or are you saying that the two can be combined in some way to work in harmony?
Both. I think that it's a big step for indigenous practices to enter into the hospital, though a couple friends of mine have brought them into the clinic in New Zealand, Wiramu, Nia Nia, and Alistair Bush. But yeah, I think we can at least be aware that the dominant paradigm, which treats everything with medication, doesn't work that well. And most of my colleagues are aware of this in the institution, but we're not really given the latitude to do more, we're allowed to have family therapy for a half hour once a week. And if you know anything about children and their misery, most of it is related to their home and their parents. And a half hour once a week is so not enough to make any changes. And so throwing medication at them is relatively unsuccessful. And I found that if I do nothing for a week, they get extraordinarily better just by being away from home.
Yeah. Well, I what came to my mind is being in a couple of hospitals in Mexico where they actually have curanderos working on staff right alongside modern scientific doctors, so one in particular, literally 5 steps out the side door, there is a temazcal which is the Mesoamerican version of the Sweat Lodge, and a huge, huge room with nothing but different herbs and herbal preparations. And to have that in a hospital is just, I think, incredible.
You know, one can find that in Canada also. So the biggest psychiatric hospital in Canada, Le Centre pour la Santé Mentale et la Toxicomanie in Toronto, has a sweat lodge, and I knew the guy who fought for years to get it implemented, and his name was Vern Harper. He was an amazing elder, and it came about, and there's hospitals in Canada, elders, places for staying and pipe ceremony. The only hospital that I know of in the United States that provides that is the Santa Fe Indian Hospital in Santa Fe, Mexico.
Can you say that one more time, because you cut out a little bit?
Oh, the only hospital that I know in the United States that does that is the Santa Fe Indian Hospital.
Santa Fe Indian Hospital. Okay.
In Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Well, we in the United States are trailing behind in that, with that one exception. So, Lewis, I think that's gonna bring us to the end of our first segment together. We're gonna pick it up with part 2. But everybody who is listening or watching, I wanted to let you know that Lewis and I will be working together, co-teaching a workshop with Lewis, myself, and Barbara Mangay. And the dates are November 16th to 17th, 2024. It'll take place in New York City, and it's called Indigenous Energy Medicine, Hands-on Mind-Body Healing. And for more information about that, you can either contact me at my website, www.bobvetter.com, or you can contact Lewis at www.coyote-institute.org. One more time, www.coyote-institute.org. So thank you so much for being here, Lewis. We have a lot more to discuss in part 2 coming up. And thank you, everyone, for listening.